Good morning, everybody. Going to turn over the discussion over to Lesley Silverthorne Marincola, who will moderate the discussion for early stage investing. I think we have a terrific panel, and turn over to you, Lesley.
Awesome, thank you. So welcome to the panel on how to get seed funding for your startup. We have an awesome panel assembled here, and we're going to be going pretty quickly, rapid fire answers to a lot of awesome questions, because this is a short panel. So we're going to be talking about, what kind of sources can you look for funding for your startup, the relationship between investors and founders, some of the trends happening in the industry today, and then if we have time, we'll open it up for some quick Q&A from the audience. So let's just go ahead and do brief introductions.
Want me to start? Duncan Davidson started a fund called Bullpen Capital. We do a post-seed round, which is late in the seed process. And one thing I was asked to comment on. Do you want me to do it now? Or some?
Yeah. So I've asked them to do brief anecdotes of the best, or even better, the worst situation they've ever been in within.
So we get a highly filtered deal flow usually from super angels and other funds refer to us. So we don't see a lot of what you might call frogs you have to kiss to find the prince. But we do have some slip through. We had this wonderful deal, very nice consumer technology, and we immediately realized it could be perfect for the enterprise. We said to the founders, boy, wouldn't this be great for Salesforce? And they said, who? And so there was a bit of disconnect in their knowledge of the marketplace. We've also seen some really good deals come in. I just want to leave you one anecdote. There's a whole marketplace where primarily women take their used clothing and dresses and try to trade them or thread flip them or resell them to other people. And one of the late entrants in that market, Tradesy, came in. The woman behind it is outstanding. She knew this business upside down, inside out, cold, and impressive person. But she was very, very late into the game, and so she didn't show any of the metrics. But that was a very impressive presentation. Even though she was early, we knew this was a killer, and she had a much better idea and would just go kick it. And she's gone on to be very, very successful, grabbing share from the people who've been out in the market about 2 years.
I'm Jean Kovacs. I've spent a lot of years raising money on the entrepreneurial side, but have recently transitioned into investing. I run the HBS Alumni Angels Group out of Northern California, which is an angel investment group, and I also work with Illuminate Ventures. And in terms of anecdotes or stories, we are very fortunate, especially now, to see very exciting startups that haven't used a lot of money to get to a proof of concept. So I'm not seeing a lot of bad presentations these days, but we did look at a company recently that had more of a consumer/technology focus. And I was on a panel with judges, and they came in and they decided they weren't going to present. They were just going to give the judges their products during break. They have a smoothie drink. And it was amazing. There were 8 companies presenting, and I say they got more interest by coming in and not presenting and doing something a little different and giving their product to the judges. And I know some of the judges actually ended up investing. So it was a great way to jumpstart their seed round. So I think the lesson there is, especially in the early days when you're raising early money, try to think of some way that you can differentiate yourself from the pack. There are, as you probably know, a lot of people out there raising money, and so anything you can do to really stand out is good.
Hi, I'm Carol Sands, and I'm the founder and managing member of the Angels Forum. We're a group that functions like a venture fund in that we meet weekly rather than monthly, except instead of investing other people's money, we invest our own. So we also care about the outcome because it's my money. And so we are typically on the board, we are active advisors, and we help the entrepreneurs figure out whether or not this is a long hold or a short hold. And we've been doing this since 1997, so we actually have some of our portfolio companies from those early days that are now getting ready to go public, and life is suddenly so good.
My name is Dave McClure. I'm the founding partner of 500 Startups. I'm not the founding partner of Foundation Capital, as it said on the slide, although I'd love to have their management fees. I guess in contrast to Carol, who is an angel who works like a VC, I guess I'm a VC who works like an angel. 500 Startups has about 110 million under management, and we do about 250 investments a year. We run accelerator programs in San Francisco, Mountain View, and Mexico City, and we have folks on the ground in China, India, Brazil, and Southeast Asia, in addition to the Mexico and San Francisco locations. Let's see, strange anecdotes about where I've been pitched. A bathroom, a dance floor, on a beach, pretty much everywhere possible you can think of.
Well, on airplanes.
And on airplanes, captive in an airplane at 30,000 feet. Hard to get away from that. And I guess just two very brief tips. Use AngelList, period. And not just because I'm an investor, but that is the de facto standard for having some referenceable profile in your startup. Second is cold pitches to someone you've never met before is absolutely the worst fucking way to try and get someone's attention. And if you try to do it to me here tonight, I will think much less of you, particularly after I've now told you this.
You know, they asked me if they could swear in this panel. I gave them free rein.
Dave says he's an angel investor. That was not a very angelic thing to say, Dave.
Absolutely not.
So we'll jump right into some questions here. It's definitely an exciting time to raise seed stage capital. There's a lot of sources out there, individual angels, angel groups. There's now new rules against pro general solicitation or public fundraising through crowdfunding or through AngelList. So can you guys talk about some of the pros and cons of each of these sources? How does an entrepreneur actually choose which one to go after? So Carol, go ahead and start with you to just talk about the angels and angel groups.
I think that, you know, the first part of fundraising is always to start with the core question of how much money do I really need to get to a significant breakthrough point and or milestone, and then maybe another 3 to 6 months beyond that so I can raise the next round of fundraising. And then once you figure out what that number is, that's going to tell you pretty much who you need to talk to. So if that number ends up being over $1 million and closer to the 3 to 5 range, you're almost automatically required to go talk to the venture community. If you're in the 1 to 3, you're in that in-between zone, and anything below $1 million pretty much is exclusively the angel investing world.
Great, and Dave, can you talk a little bit more about accelerators, crowdfunding? You mentioned AngelList.
Sure.
What does this mean for entrepreneurs?
Maybe just to contrast a little bit with Carol, I don't think always like how much you need is how much you can get. So sometimes a little reality check on kind of where you're at with the product and service may also be relevant.
Except why would you want to take more capital than you need, because the whole point of starting a company is for you to get rich. And when you meet that milestone, you can get a higher valuation.
Sure. No, I wasn't saying that. I'm just saying that some people think that they need $1 million and have no chance of getting $1 million. So just getting a little bit external reality check on kind of where you are in the progress. If you've got a PowerPoint, raising $3 million Series A probably isn't a likely idea unless you've been a successful entrepreneur with an exit under your belt before. So I would agree with Carol, like usually a lot of folks I'm sure who are coming to these events are probably thinking about building products or maybe have prototypes, and probably most of you are in the range of being able to raise 0 to 250,000, and maybe for some of you that have customer traction or user or revenue, you might be able to raise the $250,000 to $1 million level. I think the ability to use products like Kickstarter and other, pre-funded, pre-order customer-funded methods of raising money, and it may only be like $10,000 to $50,000 or something like that, is actually pretty useful. And a lot of friends and family money that might be, or savings that might be, again, in the $10,000 to $50,000 range is quite useful. If you are really trying to get angel money and professional investors involved, usually you want to have some level of functional prototype or product, or at least a very well-defined path to customer acquisition. And there are several great references. You can check out Venture Hacks, and also Brad Feld and Fred Wilson have some great old posts on sort of different sources of capital and how to get there. So I would recommend doing some basic reading before you start trying to pitch everyone in the Valley who looks like they're a walking checkbook.
So the other thing that I love about the Kickstarter concept is that the feedback that the company gets as to whether or not there is a market is awesome.
Yeah. It's great customer development.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I've been recommending to entrepreneurs that circle through our world is there's a book called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And I'm not saying that you need to be doing his 4-hour workweek mentality, but in the updated, expanded version of his book, he has probably the best list of resources where you can test out ideas, figure out how to do things economically, and by literally spending pennies rather than millions, get a pretty good handle on whether or not you have a viable concept that could be funded, and a pretty good idea about what segment of the market is going to be interested in your product or services. And so if you haven't checked that one out, I would highly recommend it.
Great, thanks. So Duncan, coming over to you, you're the managing director of Bullpen Capital, and you describe yourselves as a leader in post-seed, I'm going to get this wrong, post-seed funding. Is that correct?
Exactly right. Well done.
So can you describe...
Branding works. I like that. Good.
Can you describe what post-seed means? Should an entrepreneur define themselves as seeking seed capital versus Series A? Are there different connotations of each, standard terminology that exists?
So something profound has changed. When I first did my first startups in the 90s, we would try to raise $5 million A round. We'd raise some fluffy money, we'd get friends and family, but really we had to get to that $5 million because that's what it took to build the technology out. Today it doesn't take that much. With open source, with renting it from Amazon and launching it very quickly on the internet or mobile, you can get by with a lot less money. This has profoundly changed the funding process. So I'll get to why Postseed in a minute, but typical example, an entrepreneur came in, Y Combinator deal. Sorry, Dave, wasn't one of yours. Y Combinator deal. They had raised 200 at 4 million cap, they'd raised 800 at an 8 million cap, and then 250 at a 10 million cap. So when you look at that experience, you realize seed funding for that company was not an event. It wasn't a round. It was a continuous process. And the CEO was constantly raising money. When CEOs come in and pitch me and say, I want to raise this money and go back to coding, we tell him or her, do you understand what your job is? Your job is to raise money, it's not to code. And if you don't understand that seed as a process means you're always raising money, you're starting with whatever you can get, as Dave said, and you keep on going, you don't understand the current ecosystem. We ended up with our insight that late in the seed process, you could be the last money in the seed stage. At that point, you're building a real company, you're building out real metrics, you're creating a business model that's scalable. The next round of money shouldn't be a $5 million A round. It should be a 15 million supersized A round, because you have all the indicia that back in the 90s or 80s would be a C round. You've proven your product, you're in the market, you've got metrics, you're showing product market fit, and you're showing a scalable business model. At that point, people shovel money in. So we do post-seed to take the late seed companies and help them build a real sustainable business and then score a much bigger round.
Cool, that makes sense. So can you guys talk specifically,
not
Gene?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that model doesn't work for everybody. And, you know, I am really adamant about the fact that the whole entrepreneurial process is about making the entrepreneurs rich. That's how I got up here. You know, I had a bunch of startups that worked. And the idea of taking in a lot of money and unnecessarily giving up a huge amount of the equity so that they can get rich doesn't make sense to me. So
Well, I don't understand your point, because if you do seed as a process this way, you're actually stepping it up, and you end up giving away less equity in the seed stages, and your supersized A is usually at a 30, 40 pre. You're giving up much less of your equity in this than the old-fashioned way. Back in the 90s, you give away $5 million, you give away half your company, and then 20% in a pool, so suddenly the founders only own 30%. Today, if you go through this process, you can maintain over half control of the company and the founding group. It's actually amazing. I don't know if we're disagreeing. I
think it depends on what the company actually needs.
What I have found is it's kind of a hierarchy. If you are a high pedigree, multi-time founder, go right to an A firm and raise your 8 or 10 million and stop screwing around, because you can command that. But most people, I suppose most people here are not somebody who's done 3 startups and created a $1 billion company. If you're doing a hardware company, as you two mentioned, you're not going to be able to get by with this cheap process, because you need a lot more money to launch hardware. So you go to Kickstarter, and if the Kickstarter thing works, you have validated you got a cool product, there's customers, then you can go raise real money. But if you're a software company or a mobile company, I think the seed as a process approach is much smarter, because you shouldn't give up more than maybe 20% in every one of these so-called rounds of funding, and you exit with more ownership.
Okay, so I have to jump in here. Sorry, we're going a
I
little...
told you we had a good panel assembled.
You know, one of the things that I disagree with, though, is that seed is a process. I want to see a CEO who's focusing on building the company, and maybe it's not coding, maybe it's getting your first customers, maybe it's, you know, validating a market space, maybe it's hiring, and it always can... The mistakes I've made raising money was always raising too little, so that as soon as I got that money closed, the next thing I know, I'm thinking about, okay, who's going to come in and lead the next round? So from an entrepreneur's point of view, I'd rather look at what I need to build the company, get it as well as I could, but not focus on it as a process and feel that my job is to keep raising money. That's my job, that's part of my job, but my real job is to build a company and have it be successful.
I would agree with that. I think that a lot of times people think that the amount of time or effort you spend fundraising is correlated with how much money you get, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think it does have a multiplying effect on your likelihood of raising capital, but your function of product development and customer usage, and heaven forbid revenue or profits, is probably a much more likely correlated early indicator of your ability to raise capital. To answer your early question, I forgot, you were asking about the accelerator process. You know, accelerators aren't going to be for every person or for every company, and there are companies that already have a level of product traction or customer traction that maybe don't need to or want to go through an accelerator process, but I think that's becoming a more standardized way for people to build a network, get access to mentorship and advisory groups. Angel groups are another alternative to that as well. I would certainly hope that a lot more people are now considering at least top accelerator programs as alternatives to going through MBA programs. I think it's a lot better use of your time, and certainly probably it's better for accelerators to give you money to invest, to put into your company, than you paying MBA programs. Anyway, there's a wide range of accelerator programs. Typical market standard, at least for the US, is probably that they give you between 20 to maybe up to 100,000. They probably take between 3 to 10%. We'd be very cautious of US-based accelerators or programs that are taking more than 10% equity. Even 10% is pretty high. Internationally, that number is different, and you probably get less capital for more equity. That's more a function of those markets having less access to capital, not so much that the investors are assholes, although we are sometimes.
So is there actually a method to the madness for fundraising? I mean, should you go through one accelerator and then start pitching 10 angels a week after that? Or is it pretty chaotic? And especially for first-time entrepreneurs in the room, what would you suggest how do you go about this process?
So for me, I think the most important thing in some ways when you're going out to raise funding is less is more. Do your homework. If you're going to a venture capitalist, look at who they've invested in. Look at the partners that seem to have expertise in that market. If you're going to an angel fund or an incubator like Dave's, make sure you know the type of companies that they tend to bring into their program. One thing that I found on the money raising side and even on the money funding side is everyone talks. the VCs talk, the angel investors talk, and the last thing you want is to have a group of guys together that are, all on the funding side, and one person says, did you see company ABC? And they all go, oh yeah, they came through, they came through, they came through. You don't want to shop your company around. I think it's much better to have a rifle shot focus as much as you can, and it doesn't take a lot of time because all this information's on the web, of figuring out where you need to go, and then number two, getting a warm introduction into that fund or that firm, that group. Every single VC I've talked to, the best deals come in when someone knows someone who says, hey, you've got to look at this company, I'm really impressed with them. So sometimes it's your law firm, sometimes it's your accounting firm, sometimes maybe your next door neighbor got funded by someone, but see if you can get that warm introduction.
Actually, the law firm is a really good place to go for advice about fundraising. For the most part, if you've incorporated with one of the Silicon Valley major firms, not all, but most of them have specified people within their firms whose job it is to help you get funding, because they have a vested interest in you becoming successful, because that's how they get their legal fees. So,
yes, and you should have some caution about the fact that that is their motivation, perhaps, also.
Well, but they have an ongoing relationship with that whole ecosystem, and they have a pretty good working knowledge of which personalities are where, and they can be really, really helpful.
I agree with that, but I would say probably they're more helpful at the institutionally led seed round and Series A round. I see a lot of people go get a high-priced lawyer, and they think they're getting a great deal because the lawyer is willing to defer fees, and they're still racking up, they may be giving away a couple of points in the company. They're probably giving up, $5,000 to $10,000 in cash for a lot of services that I'm not always sure are necessary. A lot of the legal advice here from people in the Valley is good, but it's also expensive, and I think a lot of people can self-educate in many ways, just through peers, and again, using access to AngelList, Venture Hacks, a lot of things that are available online. One thing I would just definitely recommend is I think there's a lot of people who immediately start pitching Series A VCs or even seed stage VCs when there's absolutely no fucking way that that's going to happen. And I think really getting to an understanding of what level of product functionality or at least being functional and some level of customer usage before you start pitching larger funds. The flip side of that is they might actually take the meeting with no intention to fund you just because they have time to take meetings and because they might actually learn something from talking to you. So I would...
Could be bad because they could have...
It's not necessarily bad, it's just a waste of time. I mean,
Right.
I would be, again, focused on building product and getting customers far above raising money, and raising money when you have an appropriate level of product functionality and customer usage, not before.
Well, except if you're thinking of this as a dating process, you're going about that with the wrong mindset, because when you take somebody's money, you're into a long-term relationship. So I really believe that you really want to talk to the people that you want to be in long-term relationship with, rather than just, going to the dance and saying, I'll dance with anybody who will dance with me.
If you're raising money from an institutional VC and they're on your board, yes. But if you're raising money from people on AngelList and you've got $10,000 to $25,000 checks from people who are not necessarily in your industry, it's just money. So I think there's a range of dating the people who are going to have a significant involvement in your company, and then a range of just being a marketable product for people who are in the market to invest in companies.
So,
All right.
one comment. For those of you with high pedigree, you don't need really to listen to this advice. You know what you have to do. For those who are starting out the journey, these are all good things to think about. I want you to realize that there's a journey in front of you. Even some of the most successful companies that look like they rocket shipped to success didn't. There was a struggle in the early stages. Twitter's an example. High pedigree founder, but they pitched 20 or so funds in the Bay Area and got 0 bids, had to get their money in the next round from Spark out of Boston. Now later they took off and they rewrote history, and everybody thinks it was easy and up to the right all the time. It isn't. So you start the journey. Accelerators are fantastic. If I look at our deal flow, we sort of have 3 different stages of really good referrals. So the first one, we love the deals that have gone through the accelerators, YC or 500 or some of the others. startup school. You've been trained to think about what the issues are. You've been pushed hard by a bunch of mentors. So those are high-quality deals. Second are certain seed funds. After a while, you can get to know what are the better and worse seed funds. But you get into the top hierarchy of seed funds, you get tremendous liftoff in terms of attention. And the third would be the right super angels. Some super angels are much more valuable than others. They're not all equal. And you get the right pedigree people in and then referring you downstream, it has a huge impact. We haven't seen lawyer referrals as a good channel, but I think that's because of what Dave said. In the early stages, the lawyer referrals aren't very useful. In the later stages, they're much more useful to the venture funds.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure many entrepreneurs in the room feel the same way, but the world is a lot bigger than Silicon Valley. A lot of companies in the US operate in international markets and are trying to raise money for that. And a lot of international companies are coming to Silicon Valley to try and raise money. A lot of times there's teams that are spread out where the dev team might be in India, for example. So can you guys comment on really any strategies for fundraising with an international approach?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's generally much harder for companies that are coming from international geographies where there's not a lot of venture capital access or investor capital on the ground, which is most places that aren't Silicon Valley or perhaps Beijing. We've done about 20% of our portfolio is international. We've done about 200 investments outside the U.S. in over 40 countries. So we're extremely unusual in that regard. Most people in the Valley do not invest in other countries, much less, outside a 30-mile radius of San Mateo. And a few of them invest in New York or LA these days. The segmentation should probably look like this. First of all, is your company going after a domestic international market or a global market? So a company that's doing domestic India e-commerce is going to have a really hard time raising capital here, as opposed to a company that's got a dev shop in Bangalore and is going after a global SaaS business, which might be able to raise capital here if the founder or somebody else has presence in the Bay Area. I would still say it's going to be based a lot on level of traction. So things that are challenging is when you have a dev shop that's remote, when you have the entire team that's remote, when your market and customer focus is not in the US or isn't English or global. That said, there's probably some opportunities to use ethnic diaspora that's connected to your market or geography as a way to get an initial foothold in Silicon Valley. So if you're from Ukraine, pitching other Ukrainian employees at Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, if you have a connection there, might be a way to sort of get a foothold. I would just say that a lot of people come to the Valley from other places expecting that money is going to just rain down on them because they're here in the Valley, and that's where all that happens. And again, it's not very likely that will happen, but there are lots of things that you can do to sort of become part of the Silicon Valley market. And once you've been here, even for maybe only 6 months and have presence here, a lot of people will be accepting of you. So visa status and other issues aside, if you're willing to kind of have a significant presence here, at least the founding team and maybe marketing and business development, you're much more fundable from US-based entrepreneurs.
So
investors.
I'd like to just put an ad in for TI. TI Angels, at least here in Silicon Valley, I'm also a member of that organization.
Extremely strong network.
Is very active in investing, and if you're not talking to the TI Angel Group about funding, shame on you. You have a natural connection there. And the other part is that the TI locations in other parts of the world are also forming angel groups, and so you should be checking in with your local chapter to find out what the status of that is. And then locally, TI has a new launch pad, and we are constantly looking for people to come join the launch pad. It's a new type of accelerator, so I hope you'll check that out.
So we look at international deals. We don't pull the trigger very often, but I've learned some things watching this happen. So first of all, take Chinese deals, separate category. They have a large home market. They grow up in there. Israeli deals, separate category. They have American funds there, so the American funds are more likely to mature the companies there before they come over. Most jurisdictions, though, run into two problems. One is they come over too quickly, and they just flit through here for a week trying to raise money, and they go back home. To raise money here, you got to have a much deeper commitment to being here. And secondly, they often, when they do that flitting, come way too early, and there's not enough traction. The second problem they run into, they do really well in their home market, and then they come over here and they find that they have to totally change the go-to-market strategy because they had a home market advantage here they lack here. So both of that says to me, if you're going to be an international company and come over here, be committed to be over here a long enough time to establish a U.S. market and to get to know the venture people, as opposed to think you can drop in and raise money.
Great, thank you. We're about out of time here, but I want to finish with one last question that I'm going to give to everyone here. So you have about one sentence to answer this question. But we always hear that the relationship between an entrepreneur and the funder is like a marriage. You better know what you're getting yourself into. So what's one question that you would tell every entrepreneur to ask you as a potential funder, so you know that they're doing their due diligence on you?
I think it's very reasonable if you're close to getting married with a funder, especially on the larger funds, to ask them for references. Because if they are going to take, not in Dave's, where he was talking about the smaller group angel things, but as you get into larger funds, part of it's going to be they might have a board seat, or they might even have an observer seat. It'll be great for you to talk to someone else that they've funded, and you'll learn an amazing amount about what's important to that person and even negotiating with that person. So don't feel shy about asking funders for references.
I would say this. We put a lot of information on our website about who we are and what we're looking for. We have blogs, we have videos, we put it out in text. And it's amazing to me that the people that come in often don't read any of that stuff and blather along in the wrong way and go, why are you here? But the ones that do often just nail it in the meeting. So we try to make it very clear to the entrepreneur before they show up who we are, what we're looking for. And I think given modern technology and the fact you have web and video and all kinds of ways to talk to people and find out about people, I mean, Dave, you can find out about Dave in 50,004. He's fantastic. You should be able to educate yourself before you come in and determine whether there's going to be a match before you walk in the door.
I actually think that it would be a waste of time to ask me who my references are. I'm only going to give you people that I think are going to say nice things about me. I think that the whole process of doing due diligence, which is always a mutual process, some of it is just in the interactions that we'll have, but the other part of it is I've invested in hundreds of companies. It's not hard to find somebody that has worked with me over a long period of time. Go talk to them and see if that's a match for the type of investor that you want. But I think that one of the biggest problems that happens with most startups is that the board of directors fails the company rather than the entrepreneurial team. And at the end of the day, that failure in the boardroom is because there's not an alignment. Well, you're the entrepreneur. You invited people to be on your board. So if there's not an alignment, shame on you. Own that. Do the work that is necessary to figure out who do you want around you for the long term.
I think the things that probably are a big mismatch for us is when someone asks me, to fund their medical device company, or how much time am I going to get? How much time am I going to get from you? And I think that just really also shows they probably haven't done their homework on us. We're pretty transparent about what we invest in. For 500 particularly, you're really buying into a network and a community. So just like if you were in a freshman class in Harvard Business School and going up to the professor and saying, hey, could you spend 3 months with me? It's probably not a scalable exercise. On the flip side of that, we have a network of, at this point, probably over 1,500 founders across 40 countries, 200 mentors, people that work at every platform company, not just in the US, but in China, Russia, Korea, wherever. So you're buying into a network if you want to talk to us, and you're probably not going to get very much of my time because I'm on a plane half the year, and it's just not a good set up. So I think understanding kind of who you're talking to and whether you're applying to an accelerator program, whether you're looking for an angel, whether you're trying to get a seed fund, or whether you're trying to get a Series A VC and be on your board. There's just a very different set of questions you're going to ask for each of those set of folks. Last thing I would say is ask other founders way more than you ask investors or lawyers or anybody else. Most everybody else in the industry has a particular axe to grind, and their answer is going to be biased based on how they make money or how they perceive the world. And I think talking to other experienced founders is probably a much better sort of level set and check on where you should be heading with your company or which investors you should be approaching or even which lawyers you should be talking to. But make sure they are experienced entrepreneurs, not just somebody else who's been in the Valley for 6 months longer than you who thinks they know what the fuck they're doing.
Great, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, and to all the entrepreneurs out there, good luck and have fun.